Okay, so it's time for our Algebra 2 end of year review, and there are a few things that I want to make sure that we leave this year knowing something about, if not a lot about. So let's start by looking at the first thing that I want everybody to know something about. The first thing that I want everybody to know a little something about is polynomial functions and equations. Now, that is going to look something like this. If I have f of x is equal to 3x squared plus 4x minus 10. That would be your polynomial function. And a polynomial equation would look a lot like a polynomial function, but it would be, instead of having the function notation, the f of x there equals this, it would be this, and usually set equal to 0. So something like 3x squared plus 4x minus 10 equals 0. And then there would be a number of ways that you would solve an equation like this. There'd be a number of ways that you would come up with solutions for an equation like that, right? Another thing that you might have is something like, 3x squared plus 4x equals 10. It might come in this form right here. And then you'd have to do some kind of algebra, like subtracting 10 from each side, so that you could put it into the standard form, which would be the 3x squared plus 4x minus 10 equals 0, like we saw up here. Okay? So the idea is that with a polynomial equation, you always want it to be in this form, which is known as the standard form of a polynomial equation. Okay? Now, one of the things that you're going to want to know about polynomials, and this is something that everybody should know, but I just want to review it because some people haven't thought about this since Algebra 1, but your terminology, right? When you have a function, a polynomial function, okay? One of the things about polynomials is that they come in various degrees, and they come in various numbers of terms, right? So, so if you had something like f of x equals 3x, right? We call that a monomial, okay? A monomial. And we're going to see this pattern where this part that says meal, monomial, okay, where that, or even nomial, I guess, is going to be part of the terminology for these things. Okay, in this case, it says monomial, okay? We know that mono usually indicates that it's one, and in fact, if you look at it, here we go, this only has one term, just the 3x. Couple more examples of monomials would be f of x equals 7, or even f of x equals 25x squared. Those are all versions of monomials because each one has only one term. Mono, each one has only one term. Okay? So monomial has just one term. Let me get back to, so that then a binomial, as you can guess, is going to have two terms. Now, how do you know if something has two terms? Well, let me just give you an example. If you had, say, so first of all, each term needs to be its own degree, right? So to have multiple terms, you could have something like 3x plus 5. All right, so I'm going to let you know that this is a binomial. Okay. Again, we have that nomial part, and the bi means that it's two terms. Okay, so how do you know that something is two terms? Sometimes you might see something like, 3x plus 5x. Okay? Well, that is not two terms because 3x plus 5x has like terms. Okay? And you can combine your like terms, and you'll just have 8x. So actually, that's still a monomial. Whoops, monomial. Not a binomial. Okay? So that's something that you need to be able to know. Okay? Another thing that you'll need to know is that you can only separate the terms. You can only separate the terms if you are separating them with pluses or minuses. So, for instance, if you had 3x times 5, that would also be a monomial, because when you multiply it, you end up with 15x. Okay? So the terms must be separated by pluses and minuses. All right, so let's just look at one more. Okay? F of x equals 5x squared plus 2x minus 4. Okay? That's going to be called a trinomial. You guessed it, trinomial, because tri means 3, and your nomial is part of the whole polynomial thing. Okay? Trinomial. Now, the other part of the terminology for polynomials has to do with their degree. And what do I mean by degree? Okay? Well, the degree is going to be the number that ends up in the exponent of the variable. Okay? So for instance, if you have something like 3x, oops. All right, hold on a second. Let me just undo and put it in black. If you have something like 3x squared, okay, the part that we're looking for to find the degree is that 2 right there, okay? And because it's a 2 up there, we call that second degree, right? Okay, now, what if it had something like 5x to the third? Can you guys guess what kind of degree that would be? I think I heard you say it correctly. It's third degree. Okay? So you've got second degree right here, if there's a 2 up there, and a third degree up there, if there's a 3 up there. Now, what if you just had something like 6x? Well, as you guys may remember, whenever you just see x on its own like that, with no power, it actually indicates that it's raised to the first power. Okay? It actually indicates that it's raised to the first power. So whenever you see something like that with nothing there, okay, we're going to call that a first degree. Okay? Now, if it's just a number on its own, then we don't really call it a degree at all. Technically, I guess it would be the 0th degree, but we're not going to use that. We're just going to call it, if it's got if it's just the number by itself, we're going to call that the constant, and we're not going to worry about that in terms of it being a degree. Okay? We just call that a constant. So that's part of your terminology for that. Okay, so the way that this is going to come together in our terminology is if we see something that says f of x equals 3x minus 2. Okay, we are going to call that first degree because we're looking at the degree only of the variable. Okay, so we're going to say that it's first degree, and then we're also going to name it after the number of terms that are in there. So this is 2 terms, okay? 2 terms right here, 3x minus 2. They're separated, they're not like terms, and they're separated by that minus there. So it's 2 terms, first degree binomial. So when you hear somebody talking about a binomial, a first degree binomial, there you go. We sometimes also call that linear. So remember, just like when something was just the number, we call that a constant. Okay? If it says 3x with no thing there, 3x with no exponent, we're going to call that a linear term. So that's a constant term. This is a linear term. And finally, if you had something like 3x squared, we call that quadratic term. Whoa. Let's see. Oh no. Quadratic term. Okay? constant term, linear term, quadratic term. There's also like a cubic term right there. If you were raising it up to the third power, you would call that the cubic term. And I think that if you're raising it to the fourth power, I don't think, I know, it's called a quartic term. Okay, just so you know all that stuff. So that's kind of like the end of our little lesson on terminology. Well, no, it's not quite the end of our little lesson on terminology. Let's finish up our lesson on terminology. So we know right now that this right here is going to be called a first degree binomial because we're looking at the degree of the variable and the number of terms, 1, 2. Okay, so let's look at one more. So if you had something like g of x equals 3x squared plus 4x minus 10, which I think is the first thing I wrote here, we know that this is going to be called second degree. And how many terms does it have? 3. So it's going to be called a second degree trinomial. Okay, and we also know of this as a quadratic trinomial. And that's going to be all that we need in terms of terminology for our polynomial functions and equations.